Before we kick off, thank you all for joining. You got me tuning in from London here, and Alice is calling in from a sunny South Sweden.
Yes, me and Donald Duck is tuning in from Sweden. So
the good dream team.
Yeah, always.
So thank you all for coming. For most of you have probably actually been to one of the many seminars that we normally run, or potentially been invited to one of them. And we have been doing these seminars for the last 24 months now on a very regular basis, but they have all been done in UK in a central location with a live audience. So, but unfortunately we are in times where we need to adapt slightly. So welcome to what is the first digital Tailify webinar ever. So it's going to be exciting. We'll see how good we are at technical skills. But now I'll get my screen up and running. Can you see my screen, Alice?
No.
You cannot. Okay, that's not good. I'll give that another go then.
Pretty little face. Well, not that pretty little face maybe, but
we'll give you something better. How about now? That looks better, right?
Yep. Zoom in with Tailify.
Good. So, welcome everyone. We are going to run this little webinar. It will be probably 30-40 minutes. We want to keep it decently short and concise. And we will also have a small Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as we go along the session, please just type them into that little chat function down on your right, and we will try to get to them all. Now, before we start, I think it's important for us to recognize that there are bigger problems out in the world now than looking at the history of advertising. So from all of us at Tailify, we hope that you and all of your loved ones are safe. And if there's anything that you think that we can do to help in any shape or form, please let us know. Now, looking at the world at the moment and the world how it is most likely going to look like for the next foreseeable couple of months, I keep envisioning this. We are at rough seas, and there's a wave coming left, right, and center, which we don't necessarily know exactly how they will hit. And we as Tailify, we're in a boat with a nice crew trying to navigate around. And over the last 2-3 weeks, we have been chatting to countless clients, brands, agencies, influencers, consumers, ourselves, our families, and everyone seems to be asking themselves the questions of what should we do and how should we do it? And I think particularly from the perspective of clients and brands, which is most of the attendees here today, that they're asking us, what should we do? And when we get questions like that at Tailify, there's two things that we always go back to as fundamental principles of our company, and that is data and psychology.
And just to jump in on that one as well, what I've noticed a lot of what kind of questions we get is that a lot of our clients are asking and focusing a lot of the macro perspective. So they're zooming out and saying, okay, how is Corona affecting the whole industry? But what they're missing out on is actually zooming in and looking into the human brain and how is this affecting our behaviors, how we act, how we think, how we resonate. And that is also a key thing that we need to zoom into, which we also would do today, obviously.
Yeah, and I think we are hearing there's excitement from Alice, who is the psychology geek within us and studied psychology at UCL. And she'll look a bit more at the behavioral side of things, and I slightly more data and history buff. I'll go back and look at some history to give some perspective. But yeah, what we've been doing for the last weeks is just digging deep into data and psychology. And on the back of that, we found a couple of interesting things that we thought that would be good to share with all of you today. One, as a zoomed out view, giving you a bit of perspective on where we are. And then, yeah, as Alice said, zooming in on the human brain and understand a bit more what's going on inside of all of our heads. So what you're looking at here is UK's GDP graph. since a while ago. And what the reason why I'm showing this, so UK is now around 33,000 GDP per capita. And GDP is a excellent proxy and measurement actually to understand the advertising industry, because the two are very much interlinked. And the rough seas that we're now sailing into is what we call a recession, which is the definition of when there's a GDP decline in 2 quarters in a row. And looking at history can often give us some understanding. And though there's, I actually forgot who said this quote, but there's a nice quote which goes along the lines of, those who don't look at history are doomed to repeat it. So that's why I wanted to look on history today. And there's 4 times in recent history where we've been at rough seas before. So the big one was the 1930s, the Great Depression. We then had some turmoil in the early 70s, more particularly late 80s, the dot-com bubble in 2000, and obviously, as we've all experienced more closely to heart, the housing market collapse and the financial crisis of 08. And the reason I'm showing you some ships on a graph now, so sorry for the weird analogy, but it's because during those recessions, people have, or companies have been acting and adapting. And from that data, there's actually some interesting insights. And probably the most interesting that we've come across, they looked at companies and what they did during those recessions, and then how they came out of those recessions. And in particular, they looked at 600 companies, and they grouped them into 2 buckets. One bucket of companies and ships that were slowing down, that they took down their sails and offloaded some weight and took it a bit easy to see what was going on. The other bucket, another 300 companies that they looked at, they had maintained or actually increased their marketing spend. And when we talk to and have talked to all of you over the last few weeks, what we hear most conversations being about is actually these 2 questions. What should we do? Should we just slow down? And if so, what kind of impact will that have? Or should we just keep sailing and try to navigate to calmer seas? And what will happen if that's the case? Well, this study, which looked at these 600 brands, looked at firstly the 300, and the 300 who decreased, they saw that after the recession ended, the next following 5 years, there was a 19% average growth across those companies. So it took them 5 years to start getting back to speed. But, and this is the interesting one, which is the companies who actually adapted to the times and kept on sailing, they had an order of magnitude by 13 times higher return over the 5 years. So they almost grew by 260%. Obviously, and this is an important thing to emphasize, this is clustering 600 companies into 2 buckets. And I think for each and every company, it's a unique position, and every company needs to look at their own company, not just the wider world when they make these decisions. But I think we can look at them and take some learnings from them. In particular, I'm going to look at a few cases. So again, going back into history, on your left, you're seeing Post. Now, don't know about you guys, but I've never had some crispy critters or some raisin bran. Honeycomb looks good though, but haven't had them either. But during the 20s, Post was the biggest cereal brand in the United States by far. They were dominating the market and had been doing so for quite a while. Then the Great Depression came along and they slowed down their marketing spend significantly. And during the same time, Kellogg's, who's a bit more of a smaller player on the market then, they released a new product, being Rice Krispies. And more importantly, they actually doubled their marketing spend. And what they saw was that within 6 years following the Great Depression, recession being over, they ended up being the #1 brand, and they've dominated that category for almost now a century. If we look a bit further back, this is a crisis which was brought on by the oil embargo, which screwed up the automotive industry a bit. And while every single brand in the industry slowed down their spend because people were buying less cars, Toyota did one thing, and they said, well, yes, people are buying less cars for now, but that will change in a couple of years, and we want to be there for our consumers and be top of mind. And what you saw Toyota doing, they came from being quite a recent entry into the US market to actually being the #1 imported brand sold and outbeating Volkswagen by only 3 years later, by 1976. One which is slightly more in recent memory is McDonald's. And McDonald's, again, so as they're doing now, they're actually shutting down stores and will probably be hit even harder. But last time they had a recession, a large one, they slowed down their marketing spend. And again, their economic growth over the 5 following years was down by 28%. On the flip side, you had Taco Bell and Pizza Hut, who both did the opposite, and they both increased their spend, especially Pizza Hut. And what they saw was that they gained significant market share over the coming years after that. Now, again, as I mentioned, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I'm glad to see that actually McDonald's, probably a few of you have already seen this, but they adapted their logo just a few weeks back to encourage social distancing, and a nice gesture. But when you start digging deeper into McDonald's, their marketing director, and this started with their team over in Asia, they came out with statements of shifting their ad spend into relevant channels and thinking how their consumers are consuming media differently, and they're adapting accordingly. So they learned from their mistakes and are now actually going at it with an adaptive and agile mind. And I think this quote was my favorite, where the EMEA marketing director said that consumer behavior impacts our decisions. Now, one would hope that it always does and not just now, but they have shifted their marketing to, again, which Alice will now go more into, but adapting to the times that we are in, because our human behavior and our human brains, they change quite significantly from when times are good to when times are uncertain. So hopefully that gives you some perspective from kind of a zoomed out view. But I'm now going to hand you over to Alice, if we can do a nice little slide shift here, who will give you a bit more insights into the human brain and hopefully give you actually some actionable insights that you can use to navigate the rough seas ahead.
Okay, thank you, Didrik. I feel a bit like a weather forecaster and being like, over to Alice. But let's get started. So we all know now that we are in the middle of a storm, and Didrik has obviously made it clear that some people and some brands will survive this storm and others will drown. I know that the people here in the seminar today, you are here for a reason, and that reason is not only to survive, but to actually utilize the opportunities that the situation entails. Because there is a lot of opportunities today that you can make use of. And that's really what I want to focus on today. And what I want to leave you guys with, my objective for this session, is to leave this webinar with 3 things in mind. And those 3 things is: be emotional, understand the change, and raise the sail. So at the end of the session, I wanted to have a clear idea of what I actually mean by those 3 statements. So let's get started. Of course, I also want to let you know that we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any question that pops up in your head during the session, please feel free to use the message feature and just write the question you have, and we will try to answer them at the end of the session. Okay, let's get started. So, of course, being a real psychology geek, I'm going to start zooming in on the human brain. And if we look at the human mind, the one most desirable thing for it is what we call cognitive ease. And what I mean with that is that if there's an easier way to go for the brain, which in other words means some way that requires less energy for the brain will take that. Which means that it takes less energy to make a decision based on, for example, intuition and emotion, if you compare it to base a decision on information. So that's why when people feel an increased emotional connection to something, rational thinking goes down and people buy with their emotions. And this has always been the case with or without Corona. However, one thing is very different now, and that is that when you're scared, the sends a signal to your brain that tells the brain to stop and reflect more and analyze the information you have and take it a bit more easy, be a bit more cautious. And that's what's happening in all people's brains right now. And what that then results in for you as a brand is that you will see a decrease in sales. So to overcome this big wave, there's certain things to do, and I will focus on 2 things today. The first one is to build a strategy that communicates a feeling of safety to the brain. And the second thing is increase your audience emotional engagement with your brand. So let's start with the first one. So this pandemic is different from the recessions that Didrik spoke about previously, because people are not only financially scared, but people are also health-wise scared. So they are pretty much double scared. And it's also a much more emotional situation than previous recessions. So what people want today is that they want safety, they want reassurance, they want help. So if we look at stats from Kantar, we see that 77% of consumers want brands to talk about how they are handling, how they are helpful in everyday life. 75% want brands to talk about their efforts in how to face the situation, and 70% want brands to offer a reassuring tone. So how can this look for a brand? Well, I will give you an example of a TikTok partnership with WHO, the World Health Organization. So they're a really good example of someone doing it well. They are combining education and entertainment. So what they're doing is that they are encouraging people on TikTok to spread Corona-related memes, pretty much to help younger generations to cope with this whole situation. And at the same time, they've also created a page, a Q&A page, to provide trusted information to all the people on TikTok. So how this looks is something like this.
I'm really playing with my life here.
Yeah, so really what you're doing is that you're trying to bring this positive energy to this whole situation, brightening up people's lives a bit, while also helping them with providing this useful information.
No, actually, just jumping in here, I think there's a couple of interesting things which on this topic of influencers starting to jump on and spread positive messages around and helpful messages around the topic of COVID. And a couple of weeks ago, WHO reached out to us to help partnering with them, and that we have been doing so for the last couple of weeks, where we've been getting influencers on board to share the message on washing hands and social distancing. So I think what would be great is if any of you brands out there here on the call are working with influencers, or if you know any influencers, if you, after this call, we will follow up with an email, but if you would like to share that brief with these influencers and get them to amplify that message, I think that would be great, because we're seeing people sitting at home scrolling their phones, and a great way to get in front of them with some helpful information and also entertaining is via influencers. So I think we can do some good with this channel.
Exactly. Thank you, Didrik. To continue to another brand that is doing this very well, it's the brand called Who Gives a Crap, which is an Australian conscious toilet paper brand. And obviously due to stock limitation, they have been unable to provide more people with toilet paper. So what they have encouraged their audience and people all around the world to do is to take a part in their challenge, Play It Forward, which encourages their consumers to share extra roles with those in need. So basically, by encouraging their consumers to help each other, they are building this strong, long-lasting relationship with their consumers that will give effects long after the situation is gone. And if we look at the world right now and the brands in the world, we actually see that 45% of brands already are doing these kind of things. 45% of brands are decreasing their performance-based market. They are not just throwing offers in their consumers' faces, but they are being there for them. And that's the difference that will actually make a huge difference in the long run as well. So for you brands in here, what you should think about is think long term, create a brand building strategy that is focused less on the lower funnel and push more on emotions. Try to be there for your audience. So what I want to leave you at the end of all my key points I want to make is a reflective question that I want you to go back with your team, sit down, reflect, and see how you actually can do this and implement it in your own brand. So the first question here is, how can you help your consumers while, of course, you're also helping your brand? So it's all about being in this together and helping each other. And that leads us to the next part. So increase your audience emotional engagement with your brand. So the question is, how can we increase the emotional engagement? And if we zoom into the human brain as well, there's a fairly simple explanation to that. And it's about showing your own emotion, expressing them, plus also making whoever you want to feel emotionally connected to you, feel involved in what you do and what you stand for. And that would then emotional connection. So how that will look for you is that you should engage with your audience, you should be emotional, and you should be creative. So to start with the first one about being, about engaging. So it really is about creating a strategy that is dynamic, that is interactive. And what I mean with that is making use of channels that allows features such as live streams, questionnaires, polls. Really let your audience create something together with you. A good example of that is the Chinese cosmetic company Lin Xingquan that was forced to close 40% of its retail stores due to the corona outbreak. What the company did is that they redeployed more than 100 of their employees to become online influencers who leverage digital tools to engage customers virtually and drive sales. So we're talking WeChat, TikTok, etc. As a result, its sales in Wuhan achieved a 200% growth in sales compared to the previous year's growth in sales. The next part is being emotional, and it's about being honest, being vulnerable, showing that you're in this together. And one of my longtime favorites when it comes to brand strategies has always been Nike, and they are doing amazing campaigns during the situation as well. So I'm going to show you one here. I always get goosebumps of their commercials. And that is really about being emotional and showing their consumers that they're in this together. And the last part on increasing emotional connection is actually being creative. And I know this is always important, but research from past recessions has showed that it's extra important during these economic downturns. During last recession, high quality creative was found to be the breaking point between brands that succeeded and brands that did not, as creative was found to have a 5 times bigger impact on profit than budget allocation. So what I want you to think about here and go back and reflect on is, how can you create something of emotional value together with your audience? And that leaves us with the last point I want to make, which is that the marketing mix is reset. So obviously what Deirdre was speaking about in the beginning is that things are changing right now. And you as a brand, you have to adapt, you have to be agile to come out of this storm and to sail away towards better times. And it's different things that is changing, but one of the things that are changing is actually the marketing mix. So if we look at the past recession in 2008, this is the decline in spend per media channel. So you can see here that, for example, newspaper declined with 27% after this recession. Magazine declined with 18%, etc., etc. So what happened here is that digital advertising accelerated after the last financial crisis, and many traditional media channels never really recovered after it. Everything changed. The whole kind of the marketing channel pie changed. And this recession will as well change how people are spending on media channels. The question is just how. So if we look now how it's looking so far due to the corona situation, we can see that the media consumption is changing. So if we look at your consumers, they're spending 70% more time on browsing the web, 63% more on TV, and 61% on social media. And this is massive numbers. So of course, this will change how the marketing mix will look in the coming months and in the coming years and in the future. Right now, this is how it looks when we look at the digital ad spend. It's $330 billion spent, and this is pretty much equally spent, a third on search, a third on social, a third on web. After coronavirus, regardless of if the pie will be smaller or bigger, the split will be different than a third and a third and a third. It might look like this, it might look like that, it might look like that. The idea is that things will change. And what we need to do is to understand the change and then adapt after it. So my last little thought I want to leave you with here is, what are the future channels that would drive future success, and how can you start building a strong presence on those channels already today? So what can we learn from past recessions? Well, I promise you this is going to be the last stat before you go and eat some well-deserved lunch if you haven't already. But during the last recession, 30 of the Fortune 1000 companies accelerated. All of them, not a single one didn't. All of them invested in new growth options instead of just cutting costs. Ask yourself then, how can you do the same during this crisis? Because you will never really win the race if you don't raise your sail. There's not really a point in denying that there's a storm currently. And as you heard from Didrik previously, is that this storm might even be even stronger than any storms has ever been before. But just like all storms, it opens up a window of opportunities. And that's really what I want to communicate during this short webinar. So I wanted to embrace those opportunities, and when doing so, and trying to do so, leaving you with 3 things in mind, and that is, be emotional, understand the change, and raise the sail. And with that said, we obviously have plenty of time for Q&A, so if you haven't already dropped any of your questions, please do so now. And maybe Didrik, you have time to have a look at which kind of queries we've gotten.
Yes, so we've actually had quite a lot of Q&As, a lot of them coming through private messages here in the Q&A, but there's a couple of them, so we'll try to attack. We don't have time for them all, but we'll try to do a few. So I think one which I guess is probably a bit more specific and close to our hearts. Now we didn't want to focus this session on influencers per se. We just want to have a zoomed out and zoomed in view on the wider world and human brains. But one question here from Hadia is, how will influencer marketing strategies change given the current COVID-19 situation? And I think they will change as in all strategies, and that should be based on changes in human behavior and how to communicate with them. And I think Alice touched upon a few very good points, which are very applicable to influencer strategies as well. I think one bit easy way to think about it is just be more human. And the most beautiful thing about influencers as a channel, it's always been human. You can never really been able to cheat it. Now, that's not saying that there's not a lot of brands out there who've been using influencers in the wrong way, which is like holding up a product and saying, this is great. But especially during times like these, you can't do shitty work. You have to actually think about the influencers as humans and the consumer or their followers as humans, and think about how can you, as a brand, be human in that conversation. So I think it's just step up your game would be my take on that. And also one thing that we're seeing across a bit more than half of brands are shifting, this goes across all channels, but especially for influencers as well, is they're shifting to mission and value-based messaging. So as opposed to saying, hi, we have X amount % of our new product, a lot of brands are actually returning to talking about why they exist and what problem they're here to solve. And I think not only is that good in these times, but actually on the back of the work that we do, we see that that type of messaging actually drives better performance. And
in the long run.
Yeah, and actually on the note of performance, we can nicely segment over to a question here by Rupert Ash. So how quickly does performance spend tend to recover after a downturn? Well, there are 2 points of that. So firstly, actually it takes on average around 18 months before the spend starts coming back to normal levels. And a large reason to why the delay, aside from the economic downturn, but a big reason to the delay is, and a lot of brands are being fooled slightly by this. And that is, say we all today were to shut off our marketing spend, just completely stop everything, we would still have a lot of people who've been influenced by the marketing that we've done over the last 1, 2, 3, 6, 12 months. So what happens is actually a lot of brands are seeing that they're shutting down spend, but their return or their customers are still coming to them. So a lot of brands are like thinking, oh, hey, we actually don't need to market that much. Customers are coming regardless. So what you actually see is in the short term, brands are having a return on ad spend because their spend is going down, but return is staying the same. But that typically starts kicking in depending on sector, but 6, 12, or 18 months, where suddenly they're starting to realize, oh shit, actually we don't have any customers any longer. And that's when they start to increase their performance spend. And I think an important or an interesting thing, so for those of you who use or know of Klaviyo, it's an e-commerce, one of the 2 great companies supporting most e-commerce companies out there. And they are doing a daily report, which is coming out these days. And I think we're now in week 3 of that report. And that's tracking every day the ad spend across e-commerce clients globally. And what they saw was in the first couple of days when this started to get back bad in the first week or 2, spend was going significantly down. But actually on the point of how quickly does performance spend return, yesterday when the report came out, already 59% of all their global e-commerce clients, which is there are a lot of them, was 59% of them were already back at their regular spend. So actually younger, more agile companies are already starting to improve spend because it seems like they want to weather the storm and sail through. Then I think, yes. So here's another question by John. I think this might be a good one for you, Alice. So what effect on consumers will stopping marketing spend have? So what happens to consumers' brains when you stop spend and you stop being visible for them?
I think, okay, so let's take it from a psychology perspective, this one as well, because it's very interesting to look from the perspective of the human mind. So as a human being, what we want is that we always want to be connected and associated with success. Whether that's a successful thing, a person, a brand, whatever it is. If you, as a brand, communicate to your audience that you are not successful, if you're slowing down, if you suddenly goes quiet, goes dark, your consumers will connect that to that. It's not going well for you. What happens then is that they will be less likely to purchase your products. It's something called the perception and the illusion of the perceived illusion of who you are. And that means that even though you are not there yet, it's about telling them who you want to be, because people are lazy. I told you previously, cognitive ease. If you say someone, I am this kind of person, I am this kind of brand, people will perceive you as such, because it's easier than to collect all these different kinds of information, pull it together and create their own picture and view of you. So I think going dark and cutting spend and going quiet will have a negative effect as well, from the kind of consumer perspective of not wanting to be connected to you because you are not seen and are not perceived as being successful enough. So for example, look at, for example, Nike, who is coming out there strong, saying we're in this together, we're continuing our core messaging, we're on the same mission, we're doing the same kind of advertising as we always have been doing, we are strong. People want to be connected with them and going to continue trusting and supporting their brand.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the effect of going dark and just bailing on your consumers has a quite a bad negative effect. Another question here from Frederick here is, do you think influencers can have a positive impact in the world? Short answer is yes. Yes, we've been chatting about this since the day we open shop, and we think influencers can actually spread a lot of entertainment positivity. And I actually think it was this. An example is what we're doing with what World Health Organization is doing with influencers, and actually reaching people through channels which they're currently watching. And I think actually an interesting point on that was either this morning or last night, Finland. They went out, and at first it sounded a bit weird, but they went out and classified influencers as key workers. And which sounds a bit odd, but the reason why they did that is they said that, and Finland is now quite forward country these days, but what they said was influencers have a much better ability to reach consumers at large in Finland versus traditional channels. Plus also they are much more effective because listening to someone you followed or hearing advice on how to wash your hands from someone you followed for 3 years is going to be a lot stronger and resonate a lot more with the consumers than hearing it through some paid social ads or some TV ads. So yeah, 100% influence can have a positive impact in the world, and we see that every day. Procter & Gamble, well, they created a challenge with the big TikToker on kind of social distance dancing thing that has now a bit more than 10 billion views, getting people to dance away from each other. So yeah, definitely.
And coming back to what I spoke about being emotional, influencers are human beings, and it's always much easier as well to communicate an emotional message through another human being than through a brand created ad or whatever it might be. So I think influencers are really key in the emotional way of communicating with your audience. And coming back to a little bit what Didrik said as well, I mean, we've always said that influencers is pretty much word of mouth on steroids, which means that we can actually have a really big spread on positive messaging, important messaging, educational messaging, whatever it might be that you want to push out to your audience. We can have an authentic and emotional based communication that can spread easily through influencers. So yes, definitely.
Yeah. And actually on that one, we have an interesting question from Ali here, which is twofold. So the two questions are, could we assume that post-crisis, influencer marketing can become a bigger channel due to the stronger personal bonds influencers can create with their audience during the current situation? And this, I'll actually answer that first, and we can move on to the second. So, yeah, on all the points which Alice just mentioned, it's a, especially during tough times, you listen to the people that you trust and the humans around you, and you listen even stronger to them than ever before. So yeah, during these times, it's a influencer as a channel. It's a great way to build stronger personal bond with your consumers. And I think post-crisis, obviously we're probably a bit biased over here because we think a lot about influencers, but post-crisis, we also definitely think that influencers will, as a medium, get a rocket boost. I think the graph that Alice showed in last recession, that older channels such as newspapers and TV, they had a much stronger decline than digital. And I think that was purely the fact of digital is a better and more effective way of reaching the right people with the right message. So we saw digital had a huge surge post the last financial recession. And I think influencers, again, it's just from everything that we see and I've done for the last 7 years, it's just a much more effective medium, and more brands are seeing that increasing spend. And I think when times are tough, people have to make smart choices, and we believe that the smart choice is influencers.
Yeah.
Now,
and last thing on that was I think it's a really interesting question about if influencers going to have a stronger relationship with the audience, and I definitely yes. And I think if from a perspective brand, and to use that in the best possible ways, not only to work with influencers, but is to build strong long-term relationship with those influencers, because otherwise you won't see the same effect as if you just work with that influencer once or twice. So for example, take Nike working with LeBron James. When people think about Nike, they think about him. When people think about him, they think about Nike. And I think if the influencers are creating a strong relationship with their audience, if you can be a part of that triangle and have a strong relationship with the influencer, you will automatically get the same strong relationship with their audience as well. So think long term with the influencers as well.
Yeah. And so Alice, second part of the question is it now time to double down on marketing spend on user acquisition for an entertainment consumer app which doesn't need users to purchase anything but keeps them busy and entertained? Well, again, that's completely individual for all brands out there, so I don't want to give general advice and just say yes. But from our clients, especially our more acquisition-focused clients, they are seeing quite a significant growth now, and we're talking about apps. To your point, sort of consumer entertainment apps. Yeah, tech is having a massive boom. Home entertainment. So on one side, you can kind of look at it and is increasing marketing spend profiteering on the back of something? Well, on the flip side, actually, all the research that we've seen and what Alice talked about is consumers actually want to be entertained. They want to learn things, and though being entertained and learning are two important factors of psychological safety, so providing that to the wider community is something that we see a lot of brands doing. So if you have the right product which helps consumers in these times and ticks off the boxes Alice has said, then yeah, doubling down on marketing spend, at least for a lot of our clients, have been very positive. So actually, loads of questions coming in now. We will have time for 4 more minutes. Alice, what do you think?
What's the time?
You and Donald Duck there in the back. You ready for a few more?
Yeah, we're ready for a few more, but he's hungry, you know.
Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, this might be a good one for you, Alice. So Jack Scar here asks, what impact do you think this will have on the influencers themselves?
So I assume it's more about their economic situation.
Sorry, Jack Scar is adding to that. Following up on my question above, do you think this will have a bigger impact on influencers who have recently become a full-time influencers and now rely on brand endorsements?
Through past recessions, we always have seen that the first thing people tend to do when we reach an economic downturn is actually decrease on marketing spend. That's pretty much the first thing most company does. Nevertheless, we've seen that that's the opposite of what you should do. I think though a lot of influencers are experiencing that they are getting less paid collaborations with the brands. But then I also think that, coming back to what Ali said previously, that they will create a stronger bond with their audience that would also be beneficial for them in the long term. Of course, as well, people are spending more time on social media. So I can definitely see an increase in following and building a strong relationship with the influencers. So I think in the long term, this will be positive for them as well.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, unfortunately, we've had quite a lot of more questions come in now, but we will have to round off. First of all, thank you for participating in this first little digital experiment of ours. So thanks for joining, and thank you all for the questions. To kind of just round it off, I think from our side, it's have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, because yes, it's very rough at the moment, but there's clear skies on the horizon, and you as brands, you're not just here for the next 6 or 12 months. You're hopefully planning to be here for the next century. So look at history as a way to do some learnings, and then to Alice's points, zoom in on your consumers' brains, put yourself in their position. What are they thinking? How can you be there to support it? And if you do those two things, we think hopefully that you will leave this conversation with a slightly enlightened view on how to navigate through these rough seas. So if you have further questions, please shoot over on email, and we will try to get back to all of them throughout the day. So, and yes, it's Easter, so happy Easter.
Happy. That's why I have Donald Duck, come on.
Yeah.
That's like Easter connected or something.
Friends and family, have a good Easter and a good day. Cheers.
Yeah, have a lovely Easter. Bye-bye.